Power never truly belonged to the king. Power belonged to the one who shaped what the king believed. Before we begin, pause for a moment. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? It's always fascinating to see this community spread across the world. And while you're here, hit like, share this with someone who loves hidden history, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, because what you are about to hear is one of those stories history never intended to leave surviving traces of, yet parts of it still echo in the shadows of human psychology today. For thousands of years, the story of Egypt has been told as the story of Pharaoh's god-kings, whose words shaped the lives of millions, whose monuments carved through desert stone were believed to be the very language of eternity. But this is only the story written in stone. The real story of power in Egypt was written in minds, not monuments, in whispers, not decrees, in the silent shaping of belief, not in the clash of armies. And the architects of that power were not kings. They were a hidden order of priest-scholars who operated behind the throne, behind the crowns, behind the divine myths themselves. Modern historians speak of them as temple priests, ritual masters, or advisors to the king, but such words are painfully insufficient. These men were something far more precise and far more dangerous. They were psychologists, thousands of years before psychology had a name. Imagine a child being crowned pharaoh at the age of 13 or 14. He has never led an army. He has never governed a province. He has barely tasted the world beyond palace walls. Yet suddenly, he is proclaimed a living god, a bridge between mortals and the divine. Every gaze now rests upon him. Every whisper concerns him. Every ambition surrounds him. The court is a battlefield of invisible daggers, generals who crave authority, nobles who want control, officials who want influence, who teaches this young pharaoh how to rule, who shapes his fears, his confidence, his sense of destiny. The answer is the priests, or rather, the mind engineers hidden among them. These men understood something fundamental. Humans are guided not by reason, but by belief. And belief can be crafted, belief can be sculpted like stone, belief can be seeded, watered, nurtured, and harvested. The pharaoh may have worn the crown, but they were the gardeners of the mind that wore it. To understand them, you must understand the temples. Egypt's temples were not merely spiritual centers. They were universities, laboratories of the human psyche, observatories of behavior, and training grounds for those selected not to serve the gods, but to shape the divine narratives that shape the people. The Temple of Amun at Karnak, the one tourists walk through today with cameras and sun hats, was once a maze of layered worlds. The outer courts were for the people, the grand halls for the aristocracy, the inner sanctums for the high clergy, and then deeper still, past corridors where the sun never entered, there existed chambers with walls, polished smooth, and floors worn by centuries of footsteps. These were the thought chambers, the rooms where silent learning took place. A child, chosen for this path, was not randomly selected. He was identified early, quiet, observant, unusually perceptive, gifted with the ability to watch without reacting. They wanted children who were not swayed by emotion, not startled by silence, not attached to themselves. At the age of 7, they were taken into the temple to begin their training. Their first lesson was not language or ritual or religion. Their first lesson was silence, to learn to watch the movement of others without making one themselves, to learn the difference between what people say and what they mean, to learn that the mind is something that can be held steady like a cup filled to the brim and not spill. Their days were disciplined beyond what modern minds could tolerate. They would sit for hours observing people, sometimes sent to crowded markets to simply watch how arguments formed, how crowds reacted to news, how rumors spread faster than truth, how pain and joy rippled differently through groups. They studied the body as a system of signals, a tightening jaw, a twitch of the eye, a leaned posture, a trembling hand. They understood fear as something that could be triggered, encouraged, and relieved. They learned that power does not come from force, it comes from expectation. Make a man believe a king is divine, and he will kneel voluntarily. Make a king believe he is divine, and he will rule without doubt. Make a people believe the afterlife holds judgment, and they will police themselves. The mind engineers did not create religion. They weaponized belief. Consider the story of the sun god traveling across the sky during the day and descending into the underworld each night. To the average person, this was a myth. a cosmic narrative explaining day and night. To the mind engineers, this was a psychological script, teaching that there is order in movement, that darkness is not chaos, but a stage of renewal, that death itself is not an end, but a passage. This belief creates stability, which creates obedience. A population that believes existence is ordered does not revolt, it endures. The same is true for the weighing of the heart ceremony, where one's soul is weighed against a feather of truth after death. Most cultures needed police, soldiers, threats of violence to maintain order. Egypt needed none of that on a large scale because the mind engineers installed a moral surveillance system inside the human conscience. If you believed that even your private thoughts were known to the divine, then no guard needed to watch you, and no ruler needed to fear you. Control not through chains, but through internalized belief. Their use of dreams was perhaps their most advanced psychological tool. Every pharaoh's dreams were recorded not because gods were thought to speak through them, but because dreams reveal the subconscious fractures of the mind. If a pharaoh dreamed of drowning, anxiety was rising. If he dreamed of betrayal, paranoia was emerging. If he dreamed of being unable to speak, his authority was weakening. The mind engineers used dreams the way modern intelligence agencies use confidential reports. They monitored the ruler not externally, but internally. They shaped his fears, reinforced his confidence, redirected his impulses. They could tighten or loosen his grip on power without ever issuing a command. Rituals, which to outsiders appear repetitive, symbolic, or ceremonial, were actually engineered psychological conditioning protocols. The chanting patterns were designed to alter brainwave states. The scent of incense created olfactory memory anchoring, linking emotion to place. The slow, synchronized movement of participants created a sense of unity that dissolved individual identity into group identity. And group identity is easier to control than individuals. The mind engineers did not suppress free thought. They simply made collective belief feel safer than personal doubt. And yet, these men were not villains. From their perspective, chaos was the enemy. Human beings without structure tear themselves apart. Kingdoms collapse. Famine becomes war. Fear becomes cruelty. They believed that guiding belief was guiding stability. They thought themselves protectors of civilization, and in many ways, they were. But the price of stability was transparency. Truth was not something shared. Truth was something shaped. Now, imagine how deep their influence went. A pharaoh questions his destiny. The mind engineer reminds him of prophecies he has always believed. A general grows too ambitious. The mind engineer whispers that victory will anger the gods if not approached with humility. A queen becomes emotionally distant. The mind engineer interprets her silence as a sign from the heavens that patience is required. They did not command decisions. They sculpted the thoughts that led to the decisions. They believed the highest form of power was to plant an idea so deeply that the thinker believed he created it himself. The mind engineers did not simply study the ruler. Over generations, they began to study the people themselves, the moods of the population, the rhythms of harvests, the collective anxieties that rose and fell with the flooding of the Nile. They learned that a society has a mind just as surely as an individual does, and like any mind, it can be guided, moved, calmed, or stirred. They observed how rumors spread like invisible flames, how fear could travel faster than chariots, how symbols carved high on temple walls could shape the self-worth of a farmer who would never once enter those walls. They realized that if a nation believes its place in the world is divinely set, then rebellion is not just unlikely, it becomes unthinkable. People did not build monuments because they were forced to. They built them because they believed doing so aligned them with eternity. To influence belief at that scale is to hold a power greater than armies. Yet power is never a stable possession. Power is always contested, always threatening to slip, always watched by those who would take it. And there came a time when the mind engineers began to elevate their own importance. The pharaohs were mortal, they died and were replaced. But the priesthood endured. One mind engineer grew old, another took his place, then another and another. Knowledge does not age, it accumulates. Experience does not fade, it compounds. So if the pharaoh was the lightning that struck the earth, the mind engineers were the mountain that stood unmoved for centuries. And they began to understand that the king depended on them more than they depended on him. This shift was subtle at first. a suggestion that the rituals be modified so that the pharaoh needed temple blessing more frequently, a correction to royal lineage myths that ensured priests always held the final interpretative authority, a new festival created to remind the public that even kings must kneel before the gods. Over decades, the symbolism changed. The pharaoh was still divine, yes, but only because the temple declared it. The divine right of kings was not inherent. It was curated, renewed, affirmed through ritual. Whoever held the authority to affirm that divinity held the final seal of legitimacy. In time, there were pharaohs who were strong-willed, independent, fierce in spirit, and not so easily influenced. There were rulers who grew suspicious of the priesthood, who recognized the subtle tightening of spiritual control. There were kings who felt the invisible hand shaping their decisions and resented it deeply, and there were moments of confrontation. One of the most famous occurred in the reign of Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, a ruler who rejected the traditional gods and attempted to dismantle the religious order that had guided pharaohs for centuries. Many modern historians describe Akhenaten as a religious idealist, a revolutionary monotheist, a visionary who sought to elevate a single god above many. But seen from the perspective of internal power, this was a rebellion against the mind engineers themselves. Akhenaten attempted to cut the priests off at the root. If belief is the throne of power, he sought to build a new throne, one in which the pharaoh did not require temple validation. By elevating Aten, the sun disk, a symbol no priesthood controlled, he hoped to free himself from the psychological net woven around the position he occupied. But the mind engineers had not studied the human mind for centuries to fall easily. They did not confront him openly. They did not argue. They did not accuse. Instead, they watched. They waited. They allowed his reforms to isolate him. The people felt unfamiliarity and feared it. The military grew uneasy. The nobles felt tradition dissolving. The royal court felt instability. And when the pharaoh died, his entire legacy was erased so thoroughly that his name was hammered out of stone. The lesson was carved not in monuments, but in memory. The king may attempt to change belief, but belief always outlives the king. This was not a victory born of violence. It was a victory born of psychology. And from that era forward, the mind engineers grew even more cautious, more invisible, cloaking their influence behind layers of ritual and myth so deep that their very existence became almost indistinguishable from the sacred rhythms of Egyptian life. But secrets never stay contained in one civilization. Knowledge is a living force. It travels, it adapts, it flows through trade routes, marriages, alliances, and conquests. And as Egypt's power flowed into Greece, and Greece into Rome, fragments of this psychological mastery flowed with it. The idea that rulers must be sanctified, that authority must feel divine, that public belief is stronger than force, these principles would reappear in imperial cults, coronation rites, divine kingship myths, and priestly advisories across empires. But the most profound inheritance of the mind engineers was not ritual, not myth, not symbols. It was the recognition that human beings respond to meaning more than to reality. If you can give a person meaning, they will build their own chains. If you can give a society meaning, they will stand in formation without ever being commanded. And if you can give a ruler meaning, you control the entire kingdom by controlling one mind. This knowledge survived, not as open teaching, but as whisper, as silence, as tradition passed down behind closed temple doors. Behind royal councils, behind the masked faces of advisors and counselors throughout history. Even today, the idea that the ruler must be surrounded by symbolic reverence, the idea that rituals of ceremony shape public perception, the idea that a leader must appear chosen rather than merely elected. These are not modern inventions. They are echoes, faint and persistent, of a system engineered in stone corridors where sunlight never entered. And that is the final, quiet truth. The greatest structures the mind engineers ever built were not temples, not pyramids, not obelisks. They were invisible structures inside the human mind. They built frameworks of belief that outlived every dynasty, every king, every reform, every invasion, every collapse. When civilizations fall, buildings crumble, and archives burn, but belief walks out of the ashes and enters the next world. The pharaohs are gone. The temples are ruins. The sands have swallowed empires whole. Yet the psychological technology of controlling thought through meaning, identity, ritual, and narrative still shapes governments. religions, cultures, and institutions today. The language has changed, the symbols have changed, the symbols have changed, but the architecture is the same. And now that you've seen the blueprint, you will notice it everywhere, like the video. Share it with someone who needs to see behind the curtain, and subscribe, because those who see the hidden architecture must walk forward together. Tell me again in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now?